Hi, I'd like to make a case that George Washington is the most influential man who has ever lived. Most of us know the famous quote that King George III said when he uttered these words that live on forever. If it is true that George Washington is not accepting a crown and that he is voluntarily leaving office, he is undoubtedly the greatest man who has ever lived. Now, we are used to people stepping away from power and power changing hands every 4 years in America and in similar increments of time throughout the world, at least throughout the democratic world, that is. And the amount of people living under democracy seems to be dwindling before our eyes. That's unfortunate, but that's for another time. And there certainly isn't anything funny about that. I'm just nervously laughing because I study history and I can see a lot of sad parallels. Not to digress, I'll stick with talking about Washington. George Washington giving up power it's hard to imagine how America would be if he didn't. Luckily, most of the founding fathers didn't have sons. And the only one of the first four presidents who did have a son, John Adams, ended up having that son, John Quincy Adams, become president. Now, I realize other presidents had children out of wedlock. That's for another time. I'm talking about children who were, in other words, I understand the Hemings children were clearly Thomas Jefferson's children. So I don't want to get into an argument about that. I'm very aware of the circumstances of that. And for anyone who's not, Thomas Jefferson had multiple children with a slave. And even the most disturbing part of all is even though they were his own children, they had to live in slavery on Monticello. What a awkward and extraordinarily disturbing situation. Now, having said all that, Jefferson still is a beacon of hope in the world for many reasons. Clearly a very flawed man, but for his time, well above the curve. And the issue I was just putting forth about Jefferson also unfortunately applies to Washington. So just to be clear, before I go on about how great George Washington is, I've studied a ton of history. In fact, I have a degree in it. And George Washington, upon his death, did set his slaves free, but just so it's out there, so in case people are wondering if I'm aware or not, I realize George Washington was a slave owner. That's an awful blemish on his reputation. That being said, he's still such an impactful man, and not only because he left power voluntarily, but because in his life he ran for 5 elections. He unanimously won every election. And if that's not impressive enough, he was actually against campaigning. He thought it was beneath someone to campaign. For a true gentleman, or woman of course, but as his statement went, as a true gentleman, it's beneath me to try to convince someone that they should vote for me. The way I live my life is all that they need to know. And could it be any more different from today's day and age? Like, Washington did not belong to a party. He was a Federalist in the same way that Eisenhower was a Republican. Sometimes you just have to go along with something just so people will know you're affiliated with one side or the other. But he was clearly against political parties, and he wrote about it on more than one occasion. So he didn't agree with all the political division that was going on, even within his own day, and he voluntarily stepped away from power, and he ran for 5 offices in his life. All were unopposed. So he's 5 for 5. One more and he'd catch up to Michael Jordan. That's obviously that's a reference that a lot of people will get, since Jordan went to 6 NBA finals and won all 6. So if Washington wanted to, he guaranteed could have beat that. But I know it's that's just a little joke. Clearly, George Washington and Michael Jordan have a lot in common, but we'll keep our basketball references to a minimum from this point forward. by the way, I'm purposely talking fast and loose for a change as opposed to very regimented, structured as I usually do, because sometimes it's fun to just give my audience, my friends I should say, an opportunity to get to know me a bit better, see how I think on the fly. So the other thing about George Washington that's fascinating is there are a lot of anecdotes that he got his horse shot from under him so many times. There was bullet holes in his clothing after every major battle. It's hard to know how much of that is true and how much of that is embellished, but the facts are this. George Washington in battle did ride on a horse and lead his troops very bravely. Every account says that. And in his personal life, he kept a detailed book of how to have good manners. For he thought the way a gentleman would be judged is how polite they are. Again, could it be any different from today's day and age? I think whether I agree or disagree with someone, whether man or woman, old, young, anything, any person I meet, I give them the benefit of the doubt. And if they do something to lose the benefit of the doubt, that's another story. But when you go in to meet someone new, put your best foot forward and hope that they reciprocate. And if not, move on. That's how Washington led his life. And the other great thing about Washington is if he couldn't get any more charismatic, he seemed to not want the public spotlight. He would always say, okay, I'll fight in the French-Indian War and then I'll go away for a while. Okay, they need me to lead the Continental Army. Okay, I'll do that. Okay, I resigned from that. So another huge point. After the Revolutionary War, he made it very clear to everyone that he retired from the army. He no longer wanted that title. Then, of course, in the late 1780s, he became the leader in Philadelphia as they were making the Constitution, and he became the first president. Yeah, newsflash, George Washington was the first president. I'm not going to get into how John Hancock was actually the president at the Continental Congress and there were multiple presidents before Washington. That's a fun rabbit hole to go down at a later date. And George Washington will live on forever because he always would make clear that the government is not them, as in the people in Washington or the people in XYZ, wherever people might live. The government is us. He was very clear on making everyone understand that when he was president, and hopefully for all future presidents, they are no better or no worse. No one is above the law. And George Washington set, besides the obvious point of slavery, he lived his life knowing that he didn't think he was any better or worse than anyone else. Now, even to this day, it's kind of a conflict and such an obvious, awkward and horrific thing that he was a slave owner. But trying to put that aside for a moment, not that I'm dismissing it, but just putting it aside, among the other political figures and military figures of the time, by all accounts, he was a gentleman. And here's one more quick fact. He was the tallest president on record. There's dispute because whether it's 6'2", 6'3", or 6'4". There's also, by the way, for what it's worth, the other presidents who may have a claim as the tallest ever are Trump and Lincoln. If I've made a mistake in this, please correct me. I believe Trump is 6'3", Lincoln, according to records, was 6'3" or 6'4", and Washington was 6'2", 6'3", or 6'4". It seems like I have this weird obsession with presidential heights. So maybe I've missed some, but I don't want to digress anymore. I'll make a more clean and clear video all about George Washington at a later date. But he got his idea to give up power from Cincinnatus, who was a Roman soldier who was called to be the consul and lead the Roman army. And when he gave it up, he said, "Thank you. I no longer want this title. I would like to go back to my plow." And Washington uttered those exact same words. And he, in his beautiful way of putting it, he said a Bible verse, which is actually in Hamilton. After watching it, I looked it up, and it is true according to records. He said he wants to sit under his own vine in his own fig tree. So after giving his entire adult life voluntarily to serving his country, he got to enjoy some years of retirement on Mount Vernon. Very well deserved, and thank goodness this imperfect man, yet this great man, lived and founded this country. I really hope we can do better to make his dream a reality. And by his dream, I mean the dream of no one's better, no one's worse. He didn't even live that perfectly his life due to some of his flaws, but his dream of everyone's equal shall live on forever. A lot of people have uttered similar words, and everyone who does, from the past, from the present, and the future, all of us should be on board with that message. We're all the same. We have different skills and abilities, but human life is valued the same no matter how old or what position they are. Did I make clear enough that I think everyone has value? I sure hope I did. Have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, my name is John Victor. My channel is all about critical thinking. I mostly focus on history, but sometimes I'll sprinkle in a few other things. My other hobbies include football and crypto, which clearly well, let's not get into those. I try to keep my videos to critical thinking. Pardon me if this video turns out to be more rambling. The whole point of this was to explain how awesome it is to be alive and how great of a country America is, large part due to its founder, who may be the greatest, well, he's not the greatest military tactician, but he is a tremendously influential man whose memory shall never leave. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.